After the British victory, the Spanish army retreated to the Galvez Bridge, where they arrived at 1600 hours. Arce ordered the bridge to be burned down and the position to be defended as long as possible. After that, he continued his retreat, leaving some cannons and ammunition. Meanwhile, Beresford advanced with a small group of officers and soldiers to a small town next to the Riachuelo River, where he confirmed his fears. The bridge had been burned down. On the Spanish side, Colonels Ignacio de Azcuénaga and Eustaquio Giannini barely had 400 troops between infantry and cavalry, supported by a few cannons brought from Buenos Aires and those left by Arce. They could only raise an improvised defense and move the boats from the south shore to make the crossing harder for the British. Beresford wanted to spend the night at the town, but the Spaniards saw a group of British troops illuminated by the flames of the bridge, and after an exchange of fire, the retreat was ordered. That same night, Colonel Giannini communicated the successful expulsion of the enemy. He was ordered to move his troops a few blocks to the town of Barracas to use the buildings as cover, while all the heavy cannons were taken back to Buenos Aires. Some officers indicated that with the bridge burned, there was no point in occupying that position, where they were exposed to the British artillery. It was more convenient to mount a defense on what today is called Montes de Oca Street. From there they could retreat under cover if needed. Moreover, they objected the withdrawal of the heavy cannons, since it left them with no capacity to reach the British troops at the other side of the river. Giannini agreed with the officers, but informed them that it was impossible to change location without the approval of the Viceroy. Meanwhile, Viceroy Sobremonte approached the area, but his orders and erratic attitude only added confusion, making things worse. Finally, he left with most of the cavalry. Many believed that he was preparing a flanking maneuver to attack the British from the rear, but the attack, if planned, never materialized. At sunrise, the British army arrived. The 71st moved to the riverside to cover the advance of the Marines, who carried the cannons and howitzers to a pulperia next to the river. Giannini understood the importance of repulsing the British from that position and ordered his infantry to advance to the coast with its cannons, form a line and open fire. But the advance came too late, and the British directed a precise artillery fire against the Spaniards. The damage was augmented by the use of the new shrapnel charges that caused massive damage to the infantry. The Spanish line started to collapse. Beresford ordered some sailors to cross the river to bring the boats that were at the other side. In no time it was mission accomplished, and the British mounted a pontoon bridge that was used by the 71st to cross the river. The British advance demoralized the Spaniards and they started to retreat. By 11, all of Beresford's troops had crossed. Facing no more resistance, Beresford sent a private to request a surrender, and William Pius White, a pro-British local citizen, as a translator. Beresford requested an unconditional surrender of the city, although he promised to respect the religion, life, and private property of its inhabitants. By the time that Beresford's envoys reached Buenos Aires, the Viceroy Sobremonte had already fled and was at Monte Castro. His last order was to commission Quintana to negotiate the surrender. The Viceroy's order was heavily criticized by Buenos Aires citizens. Many civilians, children included, gathered at the fort requesting arms to defend the city. The surrendering was seen by the people as an act of cowardice, and groups started forming threatening to disobey the order and continue the fighting. Many militia soldiers hadn't even seen the enemy, and they felt that they still had time to expel the invader. But the Spanish officers refused to disobey the Viceroy's commands and orders those resistant to hand over their arms and accept surrender. Many soldiers didn't comply, and they smashed their muskets rather than surrendering them to the enemy. They were left riddled with guilt and hate towards the officers who surrendered the city without a real fight. With the surrender accepted, the British troops advanced through the modern Defense Street to the Plaza Mayor, today's Plaza de Mayo. Beresford, knowing his numerical inferiority, ordered his troops to march with double separation to appear more numerous to the locals. The trick didn't work quite well, and the sight of a very small number of enemy troops only added insult to the injury of surrender. The Viceroy, who was never loved in Buenos Aires, turned, in the eyes of the public, into a coward. Some went as far as to declare him a traitor. Quintana tried to stall as long as he could, but by 1500 hours of June 27, the British troops had occupied the city and the fort. The Union Jack was raised, showing to the world that Buenos Aires had fallen to the foreign invader.